Hey everyone. At the moment, I'm currently away on a 5-day vacation. I have made a few videos in advance to go up on the channel while I'm gone, but I will also be having a few of my narrator friends filling in for me on some days as well. Today's guest narrator will be Goodnite Goosebumps. I hope you enjoy, and as always, be sure to subscribe to his channel if you haven't already. All of his links will be featured in the description down below. All that being said, I hope you enjoy, and remember to always stay hungry.
This is something that happened to me back in 10th grade. I couldn't sleep, and I was feeling restless, so I decided to take a walk along the greenway near my house. Most people would have reservations about walking through the woods alone in the dead of night, but it was a safe neighborhood, and I knew the greenway like the back of my hand. No more than 5 minutes of walking through the woods, and I hear a girl singing. I recognize the tune right away. It's Camptown Races. You know, Camptown ladies sing this song, doo-dah, doo-dah. I look around for the girl, but it's pitch black. Not wanting to suddenly come across her and frighten her, I shout out, "You have a nice voice." No reply, she just keeps singing. Weird. I continue walking, but the singing isn't getting any further away. Is she following me? Or are we just coincidentally walking the same direction? I make a sharp turn and start walking down another path. The singing follows. Another sharp turn. Again, it follows. Okay, now I'm 100% sure this bitch is following me. I start trying to pin the location of the voice with no luck. I think she was purposefully changing her volume to prevent me from knowing whether I was getting closer or further. And now I'm really starting to get freaked out. I bolt and start sprinting back home. I was running track at the time, so I was pretty certain I could ditch her. I get home, kick off my shoes, and turn on my TV. I'm about 10 minutes into an episode of Aqua Teen when I hear a voice that's not coming from the TV. It's a girl's voice, singing fucking Camptown Races. For a brief moment, I just sit there in pure terror. This can't be happening. I run outside barefoot and frantically look around. I realize that the voice is coming from above me. She's on the fucking garage roof. I kept a ladder on the side of the garage so I could climb up and smoke weed. My parents thought I was tanning. The ladder was the only way up or down, unless you wanted to jump and chance a sprained ankle. This is it. I've got her. I race up the ladder, just in time to see a figure in a red hoodie disappear off the side of the roof leading to the backyard. She had jumped. I watched her race across my backyard, completely unfazed by the fall, and book it over our 6-foot fence like it was no big deal. I briefly considered chasing after her, but I couldn't in my bare feet. Frankly, I don't know if I wanted to. I don't believe in ghosts and ghouls, but I'm still freaked out by the whole thing to this day. Hey guys, I just had an encounter that I'd like to talk about. I was out for a drive this evening through some back roads outside my small urban town. It was about 10:30 or 11 p.m. I've driven these roads dozens of times before, and I've never had an issue. Until tonight, that is. And just as a preface, there are little to no houses along these specific roads, and there's never traffic, so it's very isolated. So, I'm cruising around the twisty roads, enjoying myself and kind of in my zone, when I come over the crest of a right turn that goes up a hill, which then sweeps down into a flat left turn, which has a guardrail along the right side of the road. As I crest the hill, I was going fairly slow, 40 or 50 miles per hour, as there are often deer and possums in the area. I notice a moving figure along the guardrail. I begin to slow some more, as I figure it's a deer and don't want to hit it. But as I get closer, I realize it's not a deer. It looks like a man. At this point, I'm barely moving, just creeping forward as I get closer, and I realize it is a man, who's crouched down in a sort of a squat, and he's now turned around to look at me. In my headlights, the first things I notice are he's not wearing any clothes, except for a pair of tidy whities, or maybe an adult diaper. His eyes are oddly large for an adult man, and completely brown or black, and his skin is ghostly white. As I approach, I turn my brights on, and he didn't even flinch. By now, I've completely stopped and started to reach down to get my phone, as I wanted to take a video. This was a huge mistake. I turned away for a split second to grab my phone from the passenger seat, and as I'm starting to look down, he starts sprinting. He's running directly toward me. Fuck. He gets up to my window and starts screaming. Not just like a man yelling, but like all the rage he's ever felt in his life is coming out at this moment, and it's directed at me. He starts pounding on my window with his fists, all the while absolutely screaming his head off. This lasts for about 3 seconds before I throw it in first gear and peel out. As I'm accelerating, first gear in my car takes me to 40 miles per hour. I look at my rear view and I realize that he's keeping up with me. It's not until I get in second and then third, and I take it up to around 80 miles per hour, that I can no longer see him. He was running at inhuman speeds, trying to keep up. I flew the rest of the way home, afraid to stop or look in my mirrors. I got into the driveway, ran inside, and typed this up. I have no idea what I encountered, but I did, and I hated every second of it. I'll be finding other routes to take when I take nighttime drives in the future, just to be sure that I never meet him again. Okay, so when my best friend and I were 15 years old, we were on our own little terrible 80s hard rock cover band. His dad's friend, who happened to be a virtuoso jazz guitarist, asked us if we'd ever seen this amazing, must-see guitar movie called Crossroads. We hadn't, but he played it up so much that we just had to go to Blockbuster that night and rent it. So, Crossroads is essentially given background by the true folklore story of Delta blues guitarist Robert Johnson, who sold his soul to the devil for incredible guitar ability. The legend goes that Johnson walked to a crossroad at midnight with his guitar and waited until the devil came. The devil can take any form he chooses and tends to take a form that would make most sense to the person he's interacting with. In this case, he's an older, well-dressed Southern gentleman in a fancy new Ford. Anyway, the devil comes and inspects Johnson's guitar and tells him that he can show him a few new tunings that will help him with his guitar playing. Johnson hands the devil the guitar. The devil tunes it, hands it back, and the contract is done. Johnson's soul has been exchanged, and by sunrise, he will suddenly be able to play it with otherworldly ability. Okay, so, being 15-year-olds, and for lack of much else to do that summer, my friend and I decided to give this thing a try. After a little 14K dial-up research, we figured that any old crossroad would do, and as luck would have it, there are plenty of places where two roads crossed just about anywhere. We each took an electric guitar, and at exactly midnight, strode out a few blocks away from his parents' house to see what happened. We stood there for upwards of half an hour, feeling a little foolish, but bolstered by the brave and bold thing we were doing. After growing bored, we began to debate whether or not to call it quits. We'd tried, and we'd failed. The devil wasn't going to really come and ask us for our souls. After all, that's just folklore. Suddenly, an unremarkable gray Toyota Camry, or Honda Civic, or Nissan Maxima, slowly rolled over to us and pulled to a stop. A youngish man in his mid to late 20s with spiked hair and glasses rolled down the window and leaned across the passenger seat toward our direction. At first, we weren't sure what to believe. There were lots of reasons for a car to pull over and inspect two teenagers standing on a street corner at midnight holding electric guitars, some more sinister than the rest. However, this was 1999 or so, and things like that just seemed more commonplace than they do now. "Hey," he said, "I like what you guys are doing out here. Cool guitars. That's really cool. You guys are just hanging out here with electric guitars? We looked at each other. Yeah, my friend said eventually. Just hanging out. Bored. Nothing to do. You know, he began, looking directly at me, the resident guitar player in our two-man band. That's a nice guitar. You should let me take a look at it. I bet I could fix it up for you, show you a few things that might help. I swallowed hard, mind frozen, unsure how I'd come to enter past where the veil between reality and unreality had become so thin. I knew what he'd say before the words left his mouth. There are some new tunings I know about. We stared at the man in utter disbelief. This couldn't be happening. I froze. Finally, my friend, always the most demonstrative of the two of us, spoke up. Nope, we're good. We gotta go. Before we left, the man told us that he lived just down the block and indicated a row of nearby houses. He told us to come by if we'd ever had a change of heart. We ran home, incredulous to the events that had just taken place. We ran back over the event with each other repeatedly to ensure that we hadn't accidentally sold our souls to the devil. I remember thinking how upset my grandmother would be with me if she'd known that I went out seeking to make a deal with the devil. A few days later, composure regained via our usual irreverent juvenile senses of humor. We'd mostly gotten over the event. We decided that if this guy really did live on that block in one of those nearby houses, we should go investigate. So we did. We took a walk, guitarless this time, down to the group of 3 or 4 houses the man had vaguely indicated with a swipe of his hands on the aforementioned night. As we approached the general destination, I began to hear faint music that grew louder as we approached. Using the music as a guide, we located the house that was the source of the sound and sat down on the cool grass separating the sidewalk from the street. Looking at my laid-up Casio watch, the revelation wasn't lost on me that it was just after midnight. As we listened closer, we were surprised, although maybe not as surprised as we should have been, to hear that the music wasn't coming from a stereo system, but it was live, the rehearsal of a band. And possibly, as we continued listening, the rehearsing band played a near identical set list of the songs that we ourselves would practice in my friend's basement, literally less than a quarter mile away. The quality of this band's practice, however, was incredible, especially since we'd spent some time searching and knew of no local musicians in the area, especially so incredibly close by. We deemed that location the Devil's House and tried to go back a few more times, but never heard the music again. We never saw the man in the nondescript foreign sedan again, and never attempted another deal. 18 years later, we still tell the story of the night we met the devil to incredulous friends who never seem to believe us. I promise that this story is 100% true, and we spent plenty of time considering that maybe the guy in the car had seen Crossroads himself recently and was just pulling an incredibly effective prank on us. If so, his follow-through was excellent, as after that one night, we never again heard or saw of him, his band, and never encountered anyone that could vouch for the fact that he even existed. By that point, we were far too scared to do any more digging, and just decided it best to let it be. When I was younger, a group of friends and I were longboarding around a nature park near my house. This nature park had a lake that was bordered by a walkway on one side, with lights only maybe every 50 or so feet. We were standing maybe 2 or 3 lights from the end, throwing bread into the water for ducks when we decided to leave. So we start kicking. I'm at the back of the line when I turn around and noticed standing in the beam of the last light, maybe 40 or 50 feet away, is what looks like a woman in a white gown with black hair, walking towards us. She had her arms crossed as if she were cold. I watched her for maybe 4 or 5 seconds when she looked up at us and then suddenly set off towards us at a dead sprint. We started laughing, thinking someone's fucking with us, but we started kicking pretty hard. It's important to note that when you're kicking hard on a longboard, you can easily cruise at about 15 or 20 miles per hour. So we're all laughing or whatever when I turn around again. This woman is catching up to us. We had never seen someone run that fast for that long. We all panicked and began kicking as hard as we could. We were easily at 20 to 25 miles per hour at this point. As we hit the last light, I dared to turn my head around again to notice that this woman was only 15 feet behind us. Her features were exaggerated. Her arms were way too long. Her hands were huge, and her fingers looked like they had extra joints in them. I couldn't see any detail in her face, but she was soundlessly keeping pace with my friends and I. The nature park had what we called a boardwalk that connected it to the nearby subdivision of neighborhoods where I lived. We were kicking as hard as we could for it. She was maybe 5 feet behind me when we hit the wood of the boardwalk. As soon as we did, she just stopped dead in her tracks. We went maybe 50 feet down before we stopped and watched this thing. She stood there for a minute, and then she turned and walked into the tree line of the nearby woods, squatted behind a tree, and poked her head out watching us. We probably got the fuck out. My friends and I only ever talked about it once, and my buddy, who was at the front of the line, was kicking so hard to get away that he tore a hole in his shoe. If anyone has any idea what could have pursued us that night, I would love to hear it. Myself and two friends, we'll call them Sid and Ned, were wandering around one night in the dead of winter. This takes place a bit past the end of my dad's dead-end road. The road ends and tapers off into a dirt and grass pathway that leads all the way to a creek bank that used to have a bridge running over it. The bridge was long gone, and we loved exploring the creek. The three of us were wading along, chilly water up to our ankles. Thank God for waterproof boots. It has steep banks on either side, ones you have to be very careful to get up or down. We're wandering along in almost total darkness, because of course we're badass teenagers and we don't need no light. I wish we had one. Sid mentions she hears something moving, and Ned and I quiet down and listen, and sure enough, something was snapping the brittle twigs up the embankment in front of us. If you grew up knowing what deer or other animals sound like moving through the undergrowth, you'll be able to recognize it. This was different. This was wrong. We were able to hear what sounded like something bipedal moving across the bank. The thudding of the footfalls was frightening as hell because it sounded like someone in heavy boots, intentionally stomping with every step. Sid and Ned, the brave creek wanderers they were, hid behind me as though I would be able to do anything against whatever it was out there. Looking back on it, I'm kind of a little mad. Anyway, we were standing there, stock still, in ankle-deep freezing water, for what felt like hours, just listening to this thing moving around. It couldn't have been more than 5 or 10 minutes, and we listened to the progression from our far right to right in front of us when my friends decided to use me as a meat shield, and then off to our left. Eventually, after the noise tapered off, we scurried back up our side of the embankment to head towards home. As we made our way down the small slope onto the trail, which ran between two large open fields, we heard a piercing shriek that sounded inhuman. Nothing like I had ever heard before in those woods. It was like the scream of a cougar, mixed with the chattering of some angry riled-up bird. There are no cougars, at least not in northwest Tennessee. We froze for a moment to figure out where the sound was coming from, and we heard that sound of heavy stomping again, this time moving very fast. In the dull moonlight, we see in the field to our right this weird thing. I don't know how to describe it. It looked like a person, but it was wrong. The stance it had, and the noises it was making. It was hard to see due to the darkness. It looked like a tall, hunched-over bald person with abnormally long arms. It really did sound like the aliens from the movie Signs. The weird clicking noises they made, only louder and more distorted like an old VHS tape. It almost made me sick, and I remember feeling utterly helpless and terrified, especially since Signs freaked me the fuck out. and it was just a movie. Needless to say, all three of us booked it back to my house. I'm not sure if either of my friends paused to look back and see if it was following us, but I sure as hell didn't. I kept my eyes locked on home. We never really talked about it after that night. Both of my friends saw and heard it, supposedly anyway, so I don't think it was my imagination. Something was out there with us that night, but I definitely wasn't about to poke my nose around and try to find out what. It took me a while to go back to the creek. I never again did visit at night though. During the day, it felt fine. I loved it. It was teeming with life and energy. I remember hearing odd screams from down that way every so often after that, but I tried to chalk it up to animals fighting, even if deep down, I knew it was probably something a little more sinister. This encounter is secondhand, but was told to me on multiple occasions by the person that experienced it. I'm a natural skeptic, so I can't say I 100% believe it, but his telling of it is pretty simple and didn't vary between retellings. I've known this guy for many years, and his advice and input on just about everything is well reasoned and always helpful, so I'll just take his word on it, even if with a grain of salt. So let's get down to business. My friend, we'll call him Marv, likes to go solitary camping on occasion, to be one with nature and the things that go along with that. He is also an avid gun collector and enthusiast. I don't remember exactly when he said this took place, but it was a few years back, and he decided to go camping on a whim. He packed his gear, a few guns, a hunting rifle, and a .45 caliber sidearm specifically, and headed out into the country, on a vast property owned by a friend of his. He had full permission in the works. This happened close to Kisatchie National Forest in south central Louisiana. I won't be any more specific other than that. It's safe to say, it's miles and miles of forest and wilderness. He liked to hike in pretty deep, and camp at a specific spot he found a few trips prior. So, he made his way in and set up camp in his usual small clearing for the night. It's now late afternoon when he heard leaves crunching and twigs being stepped on. He assumed it was an animal at first, and got up from cooking something on the fire to try and get a look. He gazed in the direction of the noise, and saw a man approaching through the trees, several yards away. He has described his etiquette for dealing with other people in very remote places as always being cautious, as most often, most people he comes across are armed as well. He tries to stay as friendly as possible, but still keeps his guard up, looking for any ulterior motives, as you never can tell what some folks are up to out in the middle of nowhere. He'll make chit-chat with them, find out generally what they're up to if he can, and occasionally share a meal, etc. He's never really met anyone nefarious as of yet, other than this situation. So, one thing that sets off small alarm bells for him is that he knows he's the only one with permission to be on this property. And secondly, this guy's not dressed for the location at all. He said the guy was wearing a white t-shirt, short blue jogging shorts, and white socks and sneakers. Mind you, Marv is miles out in the middle of the woods, away from any paths, roadways, houses, or really anything. Nobody is going to casually stroll into his current location dressed like that, unless they are lost or confused. It was early fall, but not quite cool, very normal for Louisiana. So there's a ton of mosquitoes, ticks, and other insects aplenty. You're definitely not going to have most of your skin exposed in the deep woods if you can help it. I know this all too well from personal experience. So Marv assumes something might be up and calls out, "Hey there, do you need help or something?" Pretty loudly, definitely loud enough to be heard. The guy keeps walking forward, staring directly at him. Marv is starting to get unnerved, and As I said, I know this guy well, and he's cool as a cucumber in a tense situation. Getting more uneasy as the guy is closing the distance, he gets to his feet and loudly declares, "Hey man, can I help you with something or what?" The guy is 15 to 20 feet away from Marv now, is standing at the edge of the clearing in the forest. The guy, looking Marv dead in the eyes, finally speaks and says clearly, "Help me." Marv said that he was already starting to actually get worried at this point, and because he said the way the guy said this was as if something that didn't know exactly how to talk was saying help me, or at least that's what he first thought. It just didn't sound right. The guy, still not moving, says, "Help me." Again, slightly more emphatic, but really just louder. Marv said this is when he picked up on what was truly wrong about this. He said the inflection of the voice was more female and actually sounded like a recording being played back, and the guy's lip and mouth movements weren't matching up with the phrase. It was like he was just opening his mouth, emitting the phrase and closing it again. Marv asked, "What do you need help with?" Not daring to move. The guy, still standing motionless and still looking directly at him, repeated the phrase another 3 times. Marv, now totally unsure what the hell is going on, interrupts the guy. "Alright, you need to fucking go now, unless you actually need my help. Do you need my help or not?" He continued loud and firm. The guy didn't miss a beat and started up with the help me's again, and took another step in Marv's direction. Marv told me that he did the only thing that made sense in the moment, and drew his .45, pointing it at the guy and telling him, "You need to fucking go. I don't care what you want." The guy starts to get more animated and agitated, starting to say the phrase louder now, over and over, but not stepping closer or backing away. Marv did what he thought was right given his current predicament, assuming that he was dealing with an unstable or potentially dangerous individual, and discharged a round into the ground in front of the guy. This is where it gets fully batshit crazy, as the guy stops uttering the phrase, goes silent, and still staring at Marv, full-on backflips like gymnasts do, back into the woods and immediately out of sight. Now, I know what you're thinking because I had and still have the same reaction. That sounds like bullshit, but Marv gave no indication of falsehood and told me this multiple times, each time in dead serious demeanor. Marv said that the guy backflipped away effortlessly as if pulled back by an unseen tension coil. He described it as completely humanly unnatural and totally out of place. Marv said he stood there, focused on the forest where the guy had just flipped into, and saw and heard no further movement. It was like the guy had never even been there. He stayed like this as the sun began to set, and the normal night noises crept in. As I mentioned before, Marv is a pretty unshakable fellow, and actually stayed in the area for the night and next night before returning with no further incident. And when he had told me and some other friends about this, of course, we had asked many questions. We asked him to elaborate on the guy's speech sounds. He said the more he thought about it after the incident, the more sure he was that it was definitely a female's voice coming from the guy. It was like he, or it, had heard someone say this and mimicked it like a parrot or other talking bird would, almost like a lure. He doesn't know what it wanted. He, or it didn't give any indication to follow or say anything else. Marv has been back to the property since with no other strange occurrences. The only other minute detail that I can think of is he did remember hearing during the early morning of the first night what sounded like a gunshot off in the distance, and it did sound eerily similar to his .45. He thought that he may have heard it again on the hike back out. There are people that hunt in the area, of course, and it could have just been that, but he couldn't be sure. Since this incident, he did some online research of the whole Kissimmee area and found many legends, stories, and supposed encounters dealing with skinwalkers and other unnerving bits of Native American folklore, not to mention mimics and other similar creatures. A lot of this encounter lines up with these tales, but there's nothing tangible to prove it. But even as a skeptic, it does make me wonder about strange things in the remote and untouched areas of our world that can't be explained.
Hey everyone, I hope you all enjoyed today's stories, which once again were all narrated by my good friend Goodnite Goosebumps. Please check out his channel and subscribe if you haven't already. Before we bring this video to a close, I'd like to give a shout out to all of my $5 or more patrons, as well as my $3 or more patrons featured on screen. Shout out to Babe Lincoln, Beth A, Kate E, Katrina T, Celeste S, Ellie S, Emily W, Heather B, Howard R, Jazzy G, Jonathan C, Joseph F, Lori J, Matthew B, Michael G, Steph L, Tammy S, Terry H, Too Etchy For You, and Victor R. Thank all of you so much for supporting me on Patreon, and if any of you would like to join these awesome people and also become a patron, head over to my Patreon at patreon.com/southerncannibal. And if you'd like to share a story with the possibility of me narrating it here on the channel, submit it to my official subreddit at reddit.com/r/southerncannibal or to my email at southerncannibal@gmail.com. And if you'd like to get some Southern Cannibal merch and represent me out in public, head over to my merch shop, which is featured in the description below. Thank you everyone, and have a good one. And remember to always